I forgot to look up.
Sweet. We are live. So, hello, nobody.
I want to pull up the comments for when they eventually do happen. Oh, I'm still prepared for this.
You knew the time in advance.
Yeah. Hello.
Did you read it today?
I read it at some point. Hello, everyone. Welcome to New York Book Club. For this week, we're talking about Batman Ego with Mr. Chris Hacker.
Really Hello.
Hey, Chris. How you doing today?
Very good. Thank you guys for having me on today. I love your guys' previous two shows. So when Mandy put out the post that she was looking for guests, I was like, easy decision. If you guys want to have me, I would love to come on. So thank you guys.
Cool. Thank you for taking the initiative there. Made our lives easier. So we're reading Batman Ego this week. And Chris, this was your choice. So can you tell us why you picked it?
Absolutely. I feel like I picked this for two main reasons. Number one, it's a story that somehow gets kind of unseen behind the Frank Millers and the Jeff Loebs. It's one of those books that a lot of people don't think of because it's not super long. It's only like, I want to say like 50 pages total.
68.
68, yeah. But not including the side stories and all that. So, and also I think it's a great self-reflection on the character. One that I feel like a lot of other stories, very similar to like your Frank Millers, who a lot of times try to deconstruct the character and basically hold a mirror up to Bruce Wayne and both Bruce Wayne and Batman and see who's really in control here of this person. So this is essentially that in one condensed story. So that's why I chose it for the most part.
Cool. Yeah, I guess as a quick synopsis of the story for people who want to read it, but also are totally down to pause this video for a bit while they go read it and then come back and give us the views. Batman Ego is a pretty short story where it's basically, what if Batman met Batman, but evil Batman, who was also kind of Venom? He just is Venom.
The mouth especially.
What?
The mouth especially does look very venomous.
Yeah. Like the brooding kind of floatiness. He's kind of made of goo for some reason. And it just, what hijinks ensue and Batman is faced with basically an evil version of Batman that's really just internal Batman. There's a lot going on, totally worth the read. If you want to pause this video right now.
Yeah, that being said, we are live right now. We're live most Wednesdays, maybe Thursdays, but we do have these videos uploaded. So if you're watching this later, hello, we welcome you to join us. We have live comments, but also if you comment, we'll try to respond back. But yeah, continuing on, this is your spoiler warning. Click off if you have not read it and you're interested in reading it. Go. Bye.
Just touch his face, so come back when you scrub through, find where Chris touches his face.
Yeah.
Where's my sanitizer at?
That's our spoiler. Okay, cool. So I gave a synopsis. Let's start with Mandy. Mandy, what did you think of it?
I mean, I have a soft spot for Batman, so it's an easy sell for me. I find it's rare that I don't find something likable in a Batman story. So I enjoyed it thoroughly. I thought it was interesting. One of my favorite aspects of Batman is his like internal battle that I find he's always dealing with, no matter who you're reading the story by or what is going on elsewhere in Batman's life. He's always got that internal struggle, like the good versus evil, I guess, of what he's doing in Gotham. And so I did like that was like you said, Chris, it's very just like a very compact, to the point, like this is what's going on kind of thing, as opposed to having everything else, whether it's like battling Joker or things like that. This is just Batman's story. So I did like that. Alana, as someone who does not read Batman.
Yeah, so I'm typically not a DC or Marvel reader. Superheroes don't really hit home with me very often. And so this is the first Batman I've read in a long time that I have read, I guess, the full arc, which was, I loved that this was a short story and then a few other short stories. Because for me, like, that's the right amount of Batman. I'm not the person buying the, twice a month or once a month Batman single issues and being like, oh my God, what's going to happen in this 100-issue run? Like, I just don't care. Like, it doesn't hit me. So this one was really cool because it gave me that feel of Batman, which, yeah, like everyone loves Batman. Obviously, he's like a cool dude. So I got to read a Batman comic book and actually be like engaged for the entire amount. Because there are multiple stories. This is like a collection of short stories. So there's Batman Ego, which is, like I said, 68 pages of it. And then there are like another 100 pages that are a bunch of other stories. I will say that I actually really liked one of the other stories the most. It's the one that stuck out to me. And it actually was just a Catwoman story. So, like, is that because I just preferred that story or because I still am not really a Batman person, but I have read some of Joelle Jones' Catwoman. You know, maybe I just like Catwoman better. So there was that. But yeah, I mean, it was cool because it's a conversation about mental health, but from like an external perspective. So if you've never struggled with mental health, depression, PTSD, these things, it actually is kind of a cool story because you get to physically see a demon, like a monster that takes the form of Batman, and it's Bruce Wayne versus Batman, and they're having a conversation. And yeah, is it mental or is it actually happening? And, you know, it concludes, but it gives you a lot to think about. So yeah, I really enjoyed those elements. And I loved this Darwin Cook, I think, is the main illustrator. I think he did the majority of the illustrations, but like he was very cartoony. And the reason I love Batman is Bruce Timm's Batman. So I was feeling those feelings from the cartoon while it still being an original story. So that was all pro. Would I read this again? No. But would I recommend it to someone? Probably, if I knew that this is what they liked. For me, it was good. It was good once. And I'm going to go back to my slice of life romance comics. Yeah.
This could have been, you know, maybe Batman should have connected with himself a little bit more. And then it could have felt more like a romance.
And I liked it because it wasn't actually him fighting anything. So that's the thing is, like, I did enjoy it. And I did enjoy it more than other Batmans I read, because sometimes I read 4 pages of a story and I'm like, cool, great, like there's the Joker. So even at the beginning when he thought it was Scarecrow, I was like, oh my God, if this is Scarecrow, like I don't care. Like I just didn't care. But the more you got into it, it definitely was interesting. I think that's why I like the Catwoman story more, is because it felt more like a slice of life. And it was more like a heist story versus, I mean, I have seen some of these other elements in other things. So it was definitely a pass. It was definitely I would recommend, but it's Batman. You guys know me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, mentioning that you said you thought maybe it was he thought it was Scarecrow. One of the things I actually liked about the book was that it wasn't Scarecrow, because I feel like really all the Batman stories, like even like the Batman video games, every time he's showing some kind of moment of weakness or some kind of internal struggle about his parents that isn't just him kind of brooding, like something that goes deeper into it, actually shows like what PTSD can actually look like. It's always because he's like drugged by someone or Scarecrow with his scary stuff. And it doesn't really allow Bruce Wayne / Batman to actually get introspective. It's more of just like, I have to punch through the kind of like the Spider-Man Far From Home. It's like I have to punch through these clouds of nothing and solve my problems by punching, and then eventually I'll hit Scarecrow and somehow I'll fix everything.
Yeah.
So I like that in this one, it's just purely like, this is his demons. Like nothing actually brought this about. This is like an actual, easily comparable to mental health and not just some villain trying to get something crazy going on. So I just appreciated that it let this powerful character actually feel weak for a moment and actually feel like he's learning a lesson and not just punching.
Yeah, I think you said it really well earlier too. This feels like maybe an episode of Batman the Animated Series that was never made. Like it's basically okay. And I also want to go back. Darwin Cook is my favorite, all-time favorite artist. Probably not all-time favorite writer, but definitely one of the greatest talents in comics history. Unfortunately, he passed away back in 2015 or 16. But this story right here was basically his love letter to the character, and how the way that we look at Batman now, which is that he's always, it feels like he's always on the brink of possibly, kind of going into a little bit of madness.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of his villains are basically just the other side of the coin, to do a Two-Face reference. Basically, all of his villains just essentially mirror him in some aspects. It's just the fact that he fights for good and they don't. So this basically takes and then Batman in this character, the Batman in this book, he essentially is talking to Bruce Wayne like he would one of his villains. He's talking down to him. He's always ahead of him. Like, it's just really interesting to see the difference in those two, because again, who's in charge of this person? Is it Bruce Wayne or is it Batman?
Yeah, for sure. And I think that is why, like, I'm almost like, dang it, we should have read this last week when we were really trying to focus, or last month when we were trying to focus on mental health in comics, because this is not an in your face, but it is so clearly in your face. Because I mean, I'm assuming that the issue is called ego because ego is kind of the view of oneself, right? I don't know what the definition is, but that's what your ego is. And so it makes sense that is the name of the book, because it's like, who is Batman's ego? And is the persona of Batman becomes so big that he's more Batman than Bruce Wayne? And is Bruce Wayne the one that prevents him from killing? So that was almost interesting to me too, is as we go along, Batman, Fear, this entity that he's arguing is saying, we can do this together. Like, we're on the same team. We share the same body. I'm not a villain to you, but you need to do these things. And Bruce Wayne is like, maybe, but I have a line. And so that's a huge part of the conversation. So it's, you kind of thought, okay, well, Batman's a good guy. He's a whatever, but it's actually Bruce Wayne. And so, like Chris was saying, is the Joker, is, Penguin, Two-Face, all these characters, are they Batman without Bruce Wayne? And so, like, at what point, if Bruce Wayne breaks too much, but he's physically able, is he going to be the next villain, And I think that he fears that. I think that's a common thing in Batman stories, is that he fears that if he does cross that line of purposefully killing, even if it is the name of good, he can't go back. Regardless if it is for the greater good, regardless in cases like Joker, how it's pointed out in this book, where he's like, 27 people, or right at the beginning, he's like, 27 people died between when Joker was caught and released. If you had just killed him when you caught him, you would actually have saved 27 people. So overall, you'd be 26 people up. From a numbers standpoint, I think any of us can agree that, yeah, it's better to save 27 lives, but it's just, do you cross that line? And that's something that we all have to go through, hopefully not with murder, but in some aspect of our lives.
Yeah, I wonder if there's ever been a reference to the fact that he can't kill the Joker because the Joker sells merchandise. They need to create some kind of, maybe Dr. Manhattan stops the murder of the Joker because he sells T-shirts. Is that right to write that in?
I something, yeah.
Someone tell Scott Snyder. We'll get that happening.
James Tynion.
But yeah, get it going. But actually, I think speaking of that, DC Metal was kind of, I think, if I remember correctly, what you're kind of saying, where everyone's heard of the Batman Who Laughs at this point. It sold like hotcakes. I think the whole point of that character is that, or I think Chris is revealing him somewhere.
Yeah, he's back there.
His costume design is so cool. The spike. Oh, it's so cool.
But and I think, I'm pretty sure he's the he's Bruce Wayne basically he's Bruce Wayne if he won evil for the most part.
The Joker and Batman are fighting in that ring, and right before the Joker is Batman or Bruce Wayne decides to kill the Joker, and the Joker releases this venom in Bruce Wayne's face, which essentially turns him crazy, and he goes off and he kills all of his villains, he kills all of his Robins, and he turns the Batman Who Laughs in that particular dark multiverse. Is what happens for the Batman Who Laughs.
I just know at one point he's got a motorcycle and there's a dinosaur, and I've seen some of the covers and interiors, and I know Scott and I know Greg, and I'm just like, I don't want to read this because I think it's going to tell me too much about you in a way that I'm not down with. But no, the costume design's awesome.
I wanted to quickly go back. We were talking briefly there for a second about how Batman, him being in Gotham almost entices these villains to come out. And it brings back to a quote from Vision in Civil War, where he talks about how since Iron Man presented himself to the world in the MCU, the villains and the heroes have like doubled in over like 5 or 10 years. And it's basically the same conversation being had here in this book. That is, and actually they touch on a little bit in the Dark Knight Returns, Frank Miller's Dark Knight Returns, where when Batman or Bruce Wayne, when Batman completely exits from Gotham, there are villains like Two-Face, all the big ones, they all disappear too. They have no one left to challenge because Batman's not around anymore. It's not fun to them. Mm-hmm. And I think even the Joker in that storyline, he's like catatonic in a like a mental asylum until Bruce Wayne, or I guess Batman. I keep like saying one or the other. When Batman reappears in Gotham, that's as soon as Joker goes onto that television show and kills all those people and represents himself as the Joker once again. So that's what we're seeing here, and that's basically the argument that's being had between Batman and Bruce Wayne, is that, you know, your presence is what's enticing these villains to continue on their tirade.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, as I think it's like a constant conversation within Batman, whether it's like movies, video games, comics, is that like relationship really that he has with Joker, right? Where they feed off of each other, and it is that. Whereas like, is there one without the other? Like, could one exist without the other? And yeah, I don't know. I think maybe that's what I enjoy a lot of like the Batman stories, is that kind of like constant battle. I find it really interesting. And then like when you see the kind of like mental health aspect of it, I don't know. I'm always interested by mental health stories and stuff like that. I tend to read a lot more of that because it fascinates me. Not fascinates, but like the ideas, concepts, the studies of all of that is very interesting to me. So when I see it in media, I always find it entices me more to pick that up, just because it is something outside of, you know, comics and whatnot that I'm interested in. And so I think that's what I've always, and now I might get some hate for this, but like, and Superman has his things, but I've never enjoyed Superman because I find I've never quite connected deeper level aspects with Superman as I have with Batman. Not that I've dealt with quite what Batman's dealt with, but I find that there's something that you kind of can relate to, right? I
mean, and that was kind of the point originally when Superman was created as the first real comic book, the real comic book superhero, the genre of comic books we know now. He was created to be invincible. He was created to be basically a savior. And so it's hard to remove those elements and make him flawed, even though he's invincible. And I think that that's why DC is struggling with their movies, right? Is that DC is darker content, you know, for the most part. Marvel has always had a little bit more fun. They're just like, give them mutant powers, have a weird, you know, do this. DC has always had like grounded characters that don't even necessarily have any abilities. Like a lot of like, nobody's like shooting webs, nobody's, you know, like, so if they do have abilities, a lot of them are tech based. I always loved Lex Luthor because to me, he was a villain that made sense. Like he was all like, here are the numbers. I want to be rich. How I do that is real estate. So I'm going to take over Australia. And you're like, okay, like it made more sense to me than a Spider-Man villain that's just like, ha 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 ha. And so even though so even though Joker is chaotic and he doesn't necessarily have a very like tangible goal, you also know that his tangible goal is to be insane, like is to challenge these things. And so it's really hard for Superman to exist just nowadays. He's so vanilla. And that's how he's meant to be. On the flip side, on the Marvel side, Captain America was made in a similar way. He was meant to be like a symbol of war. So he was also meant to be perfect in all these ways, except that they didn't make him invincible. So, I mean, Superman to me, there's certain characters that I believe might just need to be retired. And so people hate me for stuff like that. But the number one I say is not comic related is James Bond. I just don't think we exist in a world that James Bond is not problematic without changing who James Bond is. So like, I do like James Bond. I like to watch those movies, but like, how do you go forward? And I almost think Superman's the same, where it's like, how do you go forward? And there's thousands of these characters in comics, just a lot of them people don't know. Or they do things like the Hulk, where it's like the Hulk failed multiple times as a standalone. He works better within other people's stories. And so maybe Superman, you know, that's just my take on it. But again, I'm pretty, superheroes in general for me are quite boring. I find the genre boring. And so when you can bring in human elements like this story did, I'm so sorry. No.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
I mean, like, there are exceptions, but Tommy always does this too, because Tommy's like, every Spider-Man ever. And I'm like, he's all right. He's just like, ugh. But
I think it's easier when you followed a character too for so long, right? Like with Tommy with Spider-Man, it's going to be a little harder for you or I to pick up something and enjoy it maybe to the level that Tommy would, because Tommy's read all of it, right? Yeah. Or most of it or whatever, right? Like that's his guy, right? Because even like, I love Thor. Have I read every single Thor comic? No, but you know, like I have an attachment to it. So I'm more likely to pick up something and just find enjoyment in that single trade or something like than you would or something, right?
Like,
even like
Batman, the reason I'm a nerd is Batman animated series, like 100%. Exactly. And then I read Batman, and I'm like, okay, like again, it's not like I'm like this is the worst thing, but I'm just kind of like, can I go back to watching?
But you've read a handful of like standalone Batman stories, kind of like this one.
I was following the Tom King run from like issue 35 until 50 with some of the like shoot offs, and then I was like, cool, I saw issue 50. I'm good now. Mandy will catch me up with what's happening.
That's kind of why I hopped up as well.
There you go. And Catwoman came out. So I started buying Catwoman, and I read the first like 10 of those, and then I was like,
yeah. Well, I think Tommy can probably back me up on this. I know we were talking about Spider-Man there for a second. If you want to do a great self-reflective, similar story to Ego, but for Spider-Man, Spider-Man Blue is my favorite Spider-Man story of all time.
Yep.
And
Tommy's recommended that we do that.
Tommy's all the time.
It's amazing. It really is absolutely. It's beyond a superhero story. It really is like it's like a romance, a love letter to the character in general. One of the most iconic characters in all of media in general.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I do think each superhero will kind of has their own story like that. I'm sure someone will say the same thing about a Superman. Like if they're obsessed with Superman, they're going to pull out a story. They're like,
All-Star Superman.
I see, and that's the one that I get recommended a lot. I think that's one that what Mitch was telling me I had to read. He's like, no other Superman story, just read that one. Because
all 4 seasons, both of those are really good.
Yeah, I think it's just, and I haven't tried many comics for it, but it's just within media. Batman's always kind of pulled me that way a little bit more than Superman. And but I mean, I haven't given much chance, so I'm willing to. But.
And that's the point of these conversations, right?
Exactly.
It's like, I would have never read this book. I'm glad I read it. So thanks, Chris. But like, it's just something I never would have read. And now I might recommend it to people. If people are like my sister is not really nerdy, but there's a few things she likes, she might like this. Cause yeah, it's an easy read. It's pretty much like a one-off. There's elements, but you're going to be really familiar. Brings in some characters, without you needing to know much. Like at one point, he says like Batman as the entity says something about like, I know your weakness or something. And he mentions Robin. So it's like, you don't really need to know Robin, but if you know in this world of Batman, which Robin this is and where he stands with him. And is this like one that he's raised since a kid? Is this like his, but cause there's all these different Robins, it can help you, but you don't really need to know it. So I quite enjoyed that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think we talked about with I think it was the manga that we read, that I think because he was the writer and illustrator for Ego, correct? Like some of the other short stories I think had other writers, but I think that really lended to the story as well, because there was certain pages where the art, I think, was telling part of the story as well, and I love that. So I think that really played into the strengths of this story.
Did you guys read the intro by Amanda Connor talking about how she basically discovered Darwin Cook at a con?
No.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh,
We just
maybe
read
I have.
mythology, so I
Tell
don't
the
know.
story.
Well, I have the deluxe version. I basically have the hardcover, the soft cover, and I actually read it electronic. I'm one of those kind of guys. But
No.
so basically, in the beginning, Amanda Connor does the foreword for the deluxe version, and she talks about how she had a really hard time getting into the industry, and she went to cons and was basically pitching herself to all these different, Marvel, DC, whomever. And once she kind of started to make it, she almost immediately found Darwin doing exactly what she tried to do while she was coming up. She changed her style to make it, and then kind of became Amanda Connor, because she has a very cartoony feel to her art as well. And it's almost like when she saw Darwin Cook's art, she wanted to give him a chance, because she knew how very personal and how unique his art style was. She didn't even realize how much of a great writer he was as well. Mm-hmm. But the fact that they had a great relationship until eventually he passed. But I just found that really interesting, how someone who, this doesn't really have anything to do with ego per se, more about Darwin. I love the story behind, someone who had made it, found someone who kind of reminded themselves of them, and gave them a chance as well. And now he's revered as one of the greatest in the in the medium. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you guys are familiar. I'm sure you are. The New Frontier is kind of like his magnum opus, Darwin Cook's. So if it wasn't for Amanda Connor and it wasn't for Batman Ego, maybe we never got. A lot of people consider the greatest DC story of all time, New Frontier.
Yeah, comics is like that, which is both good and bad, and kind of me and Tommy and Mandy have all been behind the curtain, but you can see how much is networking based, which can be really awesome, because you see amazing people. I think James Tynion and Marguerite were both kind of apprentices of Scott Snyder. And so James is now writing Batman, and is it Tynion or Tynion? I feel bad.
I always say Tynion, but it could be
I
Tynion.
used to say Tynion, but it's Tynion. Anyways,
Read it as Tyrion, like Game of Thrones.
Something.
Tyrion.
And then Marguerite she did DC Bombshells, and a few other DC stuff. Yeah. But she does some amazing indie work. I love it so much. And I think right now she's on Power Rangers, or she was last time I talked to her. You're trying to think.
I think she's off now, but
these are two, these two writers are people that are amazing, and they came from Scott. But then you also look at the artist side, and absolutely, this is a great story. I worked with J. Scott Campbell for a long time, and the fact that Jim Lee would walk over and be like, "How's my buddy?" Because he literally helped build this guy. But then you also see 1,000 fans wait in line. Some with varying degrees of skill, but some of them are amazing artists, and they're like, "Oh, I just got my first gig. You are my greatest inspiration." It's just this continuous stream of love. There are times that I wish it wasn't so much of a little group that you have to know someone, because I definitely know amazing, talented people that if they got the right opportunities, they would shine. But those opportunities are given to others, which might also be amazing. But I would love to see an expansion of diversity. There are certain writers that write everything for Marvel all at once, and it's super annoying. No, I'm just kidding. I was making fun of Charles Soule, because for the first year, who Tommy is
trouble.
Film all lasted, guys. I gotta go.
No, but he at the time he was writing he had 6 things a month coming out, which is insane, and that's awesome. And I love how he writes. I don't want them to take that away from him in any means, but I would also love to see different stories.
More people get
and with someone like Batman, we can have 4 different things running. People understand the idea of multiverses and unconnected, non-connected timelines. So I think while this main run of Batman has been running. What have we had? Batman Damned. We've had a few other
The Last Night on
Batmans.
Earth,
Yeah,
Death
you would
Metals now coming out.
all the
and
medals,
Yeah.
yeah. Mhm.
all the medals.
and I think that's really awesome, and that's something that only the big two could ever do. And so I think that that's really cool.
I wanted to quickly share a story. You guys were talking about how it takes just one person to kind of bring someone to light and make them kind of or not really make them, but show the vast majority that they are talented. It was back in 2017. The first time I ever met Tom King was in Kansas City at Planet Comic-Con. And Tom King's line was, this was probably right at the beginning of Mr. Miracle. And the line was relatively long, but not as long as it is now. I mean, it was probably 10 to 12 people, I'd say. And right next to him was this newish artist that no one had really heard of. His name is Clay Mann, who a lot of us know now as, I mean, honestly, one of the premier talents in comics. I mean, he's absolutely amazing. But he was just sitting there doodling away while no one was talking to him. He did not have a line. Not one person came up to him except for my ex-girlfriend.
I mean, he wouldn't say anything even if someone talked to him. He's a very shy person, but go on.
Right. But I just found that so interesting because I remember that moment, and then Heroes in Crisis came out, and I was like, "Are you kidding?" Like, he is legitimately one of the beginning of the next generation of great comic book artists, right there, with no one talking to him. So it definitely takes someone to like catapult them towards.
I don't know, Mandy. Can we share our back end story of how that came about?
Probably, yeah.
Yeah, because we know this because the company Mandy works for is called Comic Sketch Art, and they actually are the management company, the representation at cons, as well as the people that facilitate commissions of signatures for Clay. And they actually, one of the first people they ever had was Clay Mann. It was he ended up knowing the owner by some extension, maybe just cons. Anyways, they've had him on his team forever. So we do know him quite well. I used to work for that company kind of seasonally at conventions. I'm no longer with them. And Mandy still works for them. We don't think this is gossip. This is pretty public, but basically,
I feel like Tom has talked about it.
Yeah, I just get nervous. Anyways, but basically, there was an issue with Tom experiencing other artists or having a fear of other artists not hitting deadlines for his Batman run. And it was so important to him.
Something fell through or something.
Yeah, I don't really know what happened, but basically DC is like, we are giving you this Batman run. It's a huge deal. We need to get you an artist. And they were able to link up. And I believe it was through CSA. It might not have been, but they were able to link up Clay Mann. And basically the conversation that went down was if you hit your deadlines, you can work on Batman interiors. And up till that moment, Clay had a certain contract with DC or something that basically meant he was mainly doing covers. So it completely, absolutely game changed this human just with that connection.
The first thing they did together was Batman. Man, I'm gonna get the issues wrong. The Date Night series, I think, was the first.
Yeah, it was Double Date, issue number 37.
Yeah, I was like, I know it was in the 30s. I couldn't remember.
That's my favorite issue of the whole run.
Me too.
By the way.
Don't tell me.
Yeah. Don't tell me. Yeah.
But yeah, no, it's incredible. I don't know. I love that issue so much, and even
the great commentary on Superman and Batman's life and how they look up to each other, but they don't want to ever admit it. They're like brothers almost. Anyway, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was just gonna say even some of my other favorites are near the end of the run when Bat and Cat get back together and Clay and Tom worked on that together again. And it's some of the most beautiful, but I love. So I'm a sucker for there's the one photo or the one page I just really sticks out is I think they're on a cliff's edge and they're both dressed in their costumes and they're just in this embraced kiss, and you see Catwoman has her foot kicked back, and Clay had the water kind of flips up with her foot. It looks animated the way that he drew it, and it's just the attention to little fine details. I'm
also this
that
cover.
one too. Yeah,
there's nothing I can say bad about this cover. Yeah. It's a Heroes in Crisis. I don't know what issue it is, but
Clayman also draws, in my opinion, what's the word I'm looking for? Most ideal Batgirl of all time. I think I'll probably just go ahead and, if you want to look right here as well, very similar to that, I'd say. But
I love his Lois too.
His what?
His Lois Lane is stunning too. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to share one page of Batman Ego before we completely move on from Ego.
Yeah, keep going on tangents.
It was, I think, or if you're on an electronic reader, it's page 38, if I'm not mistaken. I'm getting into it really quickly. It's the Batman persona talking to Bruce Wayne, and it shows Bruce Wayne briefly after his parents had been killed there in Crime Alley. And it shows Bruce almost like praying underneath a candlelight, which is kind of interesting. I didn't realize this is in the 1920s. But basically, this is the page. It looks like this, if you guys are following along.
Okay, yeah.
From the moment on, we were consistent companions. I watched you as you struggled to carry on, to find a reason for what had happened. When no reason could be found, I drove you to create a reason, to discover a purpose in a world gone mad. All your travels, all your training, the thirst for knowledge and adventure. I was there silently urging you forward. I just think that's a great commentary on again, the two separate entities that is Batman and Bruce Wayne, and how they do have to coexist, and they both need each other to exist. So
I did find a lot of the writing was very poetic. I couldn't pick it out. I should have circled it or something, or remembered the page, but it was I think he was just describing Batman falling or jumping or something, and just the words he used, it just made me kind of step back for a second. I was like, dang, that was intense, just beautifully written. I think too, there's a page where the panels are split, the faces are split, and it's different. Even that, I was just holy.
Doctor, and then and Two-Face Harvey, and then Two-Face Two-Face. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That was cool.
Yeah.
That too, that gave me that felt very modern to me. I don't actually know. Do you know when this came out?
2000.
2000. Yeah. Okay. So it feels like the start of the modern age, which is a little bit earlier than that, but that's about when I would have pegged this. But so a lot of the things you kind of take for granted now, you're seeing in this. So I almost have to believe that he was one of the people creating modern comics. And the thing about modern comics is that it's read like a story, it's read like an experience. Whereas a lot of older comics are, here's the art and the words on it, and there's quite a bit of words, and then if there's action, it's kind of just, that's where you might see the sound bubbles, or it's just very dry, I feel like. And that doesn't mean there's not good stories, it's just a certain way. It's like how film has evolved over the years, so have comics. And so seeing those elements in this, including what Mandy was saying, I have two panels that stood out. So I was doing it on Comixology on the guided view. So this is actually just a small part of a page, but it was just this, that's gonna be my phone background. It's just a moment between their conversation. And I just thought that's exactly, if you had to describe the book, you could almost just show that to someone. And then the other one was in the short story immediately after. And I ended up, I was asking Mandy, I said, are we reading this whole thing or whatever? She's like, read the whole thing. We're going to talk about it all. And I flip, 2 pages, and then I just get hit with this. And I just, because of Bruce Timm and my love for him, just seeing this character drawn like that, it literally knocked me on my butt. So yeah, I'm now a huge fan of Darwyn Cooke. I love comics that use an illustrator style. I find it so stylized, and I love it. Ooh, he's going to grab something. I love when he grabs something.
Wish I had props.
I know, right?
I know, he even wore a Batman shirt, and I feel like we all missed this memo.
Please read this. If you like Darwyn Cooke, I know you said you don't like thick books, and this is very thick, but
I
this
like
is a lot.
thick books, but
Okay, this is
Superman in there though.
What's that?
Keep Superman out of it though.
yeah.
Boring.
No, I'm just
This is it's a lot. It's not actually a ton of text. It's a lot of art, honestly, a lot of visual storytelling, and it's basically a mixture of Cold War, JFK, actual history mixed in with the golden age of DC Comics. So, like I said, this is a top 3 book for me of all time. I can't recommend if you're going to read Ego and love it. I highly recommend graduating to this at some point.
What's it called?
It's called The New Frontier.
Okay.
Yeah,
I will have to read that.
Written and drawn by Norman Cook as well.
Love it. Love it. If you ask Mandy what my favorite genre of novel is, I'm sure she'll say historical fiction. Yeah. So anything that brings in alternate histories and brings in our world, I'm just love it. So even in Batman Ego, I could tell what year or like the range of years that it could probably have been, even by the fact that Bruce Wayne has a white t-shirt tucked into his pants and they were a certain cut. Just like, this is so cool. And he doesn't leave the Batcave. Like, how do I know that? But I loved it.
I think it's worth noting as well. We've touched on the fact that we think a lot of this conversation between Batman and Bruce Wayne is that of his actual mental state. But they tell you at the very beginning, while chasing the criminal that was associated with the Joker during the charity ball robbery, Batman almost falls off a bridge and he hurts his arm somehow to the point where it's like throbbing and he's basically like bleeding out to a certain extent. And I think a lot of that has to deal with this moment happening to him. Maybe it was a loss of blood, or maybe he was just so traumatized by watching. And again, spoilers for the book itself. Buster Scruggs, is that his name or something like that?
Yeah.
Scripps.
Goon name. Bad
guy. He admits that if Batman takes him in tonight, the Joker will find him and the Joker will kill him. And he also admits that he actually killed his wife and daughter before trying to escape Gotham with all the charity money. And as Batman's trying to go after him after he finds this out, the guy throws himself off the bridge and commits suicide. And that's what essentially pushes Batman into the Batcave and begins this confrontation with Batman, or Bruce Wayne versus Batman.
Which does end up in basically the exact same, that bad guy, the bridge jump is unsuccessful. Batman saves him. So he ends up finishing it with a gun. And there's a moment where Batman has given Bruce Wayne a gun. Like, there is one way to get rid of me. And it's basically the idea of me as Batman as well as me as fear. It's going to exist. So if you can't live with that, this is your way out. And so it's kind of a cool little, call back to that moment that you're talking about of Batman just witnessed this while severely injured with trauma, and then is being forced to go through this for whatever reason. So what do we think happened at the end of Ego? Like, it is pretty much, it's pretty easy to decode what the ending was, but it doesn't say it in plain terms. So I'm curious to know what you guys thought of the ending of Ego.
Can we go?
Chris, go.
I have my analysis. Essentially, I think that they come to grips with each other. I think that's probably the easiest answer. That they realize it's basically like we talked about. The internal struggle eventually comes to a stalemate, and they realize, like you had said, either you off yourself and end this, or we learn to coexist and we learn to work together. Because we have one side, the Batman side, who wants to basically cure Gotham of its evil, and then you have Bruce Wayne who wants to cure it by ridding it of evil. So one wants to kill, one doesn't. That's basically the central argument between them, I think. And at the end of it, they just come to grips with the fact that Bruce Wayne kind of has this kind of moment of like this kind of like triumph, and he has that last hurrah against the Batman and basically says, I'm not going to kill, but we can work together and make this city great again. So I think it's basically the beginning of their next stage in their relationship, Batman and Bruce Wayne.
So what do you think the symbolism of the Batman fear character kind of blowing up and becoming a photo of his family? What do you think that symbolized? Anybody?
Mandy, did you have something?
I think what happened to his family is what started Batman. Ultimately, you know what I mean? Ultimately, is kind of like his reasoning for wanting to stop the crime in Gotham and why he feels so passionately, and that's something that he always kind of goes back to and struggles with. So I think, I don't know, the symbolism could be just like, yeah, like is an extension of that is where it started, and that's what like his reasoning for maybe that side of him, like the Batman side of him. I don't know that.
Like, do you think he was, because this is kind of almost how I was thinking about perceiving it. I came to my own conclusions, but it was during the story before Batman says what his entity is named, which ended up being fear. I thought it was going to be like death or fear of death or fear of dying or losing your loved ones, you know, fear of abandonment, death, the end, because he lost his parents, and potentially, depending on what version of Batman you're reading, he may have lost other people. He may have lost some of his Robins. You know, there has been deaths. I don't know what timeline we're in. So I was wondering when it came to the photo, had he maybe been denying? Has he never coped? Has he never acknowledged that his parents are gone? You know, has he never grieved? Because a lot, you know, the stages of grief are like anger, denial, you know, and you have to go through all that. And so I'm like, does the fear of death, fear manifesting into a photo of his parents, does that mean he has closure finally?
I think that's really well said, and that's kind of how I took it. I think it was him kind of overcoming his grief, and now basically approaching the idea of Batman maybe in a different light, other than you know, using his fear as a tool, you know, or
So
maybe
like bury it down. Yeah.
It used to be a burden, now it's a tool kind of thing. Yeah.
Cool. What about you, Tommy? You have your master's degree.
Put on my English degree hat.
Yeah, there you go.
No, I think I have a kind of similar idea that what you guys had. I kind of feel like that gooey Venom Batman represented just more of his drive and why he is Batman. He like why the costume exists, why he does all these things. So when he named it Fear, it was he like that fear became maybe the reason why he does what he does, and the side that he doesn't want to accept that maybe that's why he is Batman is because he's afraid and that there is fear, and that like just I feel like fear can kind of encompass a lot of things in that kind of sense. Like, is he afraid of a thing? Are people afraid of him? Is he afraid of who he could become? All that shenanigans. And I felt like at the end when fear kind of went up in smoke and became the picture of his family, I saw it more as him realizing that the drive of why he is Batman isn't because of fear and isn't because of anger, isn't because of revenge. It's because of what happened to his family. So when it falls down and he catches it, he realizes, oh, I do this because of what my parents taught me, like how my dad was a doctor and he saved that person's life, and or didn't, but he accepted what happens to them. Like there are things that led to me to where I am now, and without the death of them, I wouldn't be here. So this is a reminder that no matter what happens, no matter how evil I go, no matter how far I take it, this is why I started it. And if I can save a certain amount of lives, then it's all worth it, because good old mom and dad. And then he takes the photo and puts it into
the saving the life thing. I mean, it's very telling that he chose to include that whole little interlude of his dad failing.
Yeah.
His dad failed. You know, he's a healer. He's supposed to save people, and he didn't. And, you know, then he goes on to ask his dad, are you going to die? So I think you're spot on, Tommy. I think all of us have pretty much agreed, but have good conversation. But I think part of it too is when you have such an amazing storyteller, like we now know Darwyn Cooke is, every panel, every sentence is not just there to give backstory. There's a reason for it. So I think that's right, is like his dad was a healer and taught him love, but also showed him that in spite of failure, you can keep moving. And so, yeah, maybe Batman needed this moment to kind of bring it into a real world. As I was reading it, I couldn't help thinking of what is happening in the world now, what has happened in the past. And so what you were saying about without the instigating factor, without the triggering moment being tragic death, you wouldn't have Batman. So you think about the domino effect. Is the world better or worse? Does one bad thing justify whatever? And without people experiencing bad things, would we have the proper rules and regulations in place? And I think that we're kind of going through something right now in the world that should have never happened. These things are awful. A lot of these things have happened for years and needed to be fixed hundreds of years ago, but they weren't. But the thing is, a lot of us were privileged enough to not be educated about it. So absolutely everything that's happened has been awful, but has almost been necessary. So I couldn't help but think of that in a real world scenario, which is crazy to think about. This book was written 20 years ago by someone that is not existing in this moment to experience this. So it's almost just, what do humans do? And you can choose to become a villain when something bad happens to you, or you can choose to try to improve the world.
Well, that's
just Batman,
Joker
right?
and Batman, right? It's like both of them
say-
have trauma, and they both pick different sides.
Yeah, they say you can't make an omelet without cracking a couple eggs. So
There you go.
that's the way. Sometimes these things, and that's kind of a lighter way of looking at it. But it sometimes it takes an incident to propel us towards greatness, and maybe we're living that right now. Hopefully,
Yeah.
That's why superheroes are still popular and can still actually keep coming out. Alana, they're good, I promise.
Alana.
I love some superheroes, but I love the superheroes that I can relate to. So I think that that's valid. And so they're all modern because there was no female superheroes before. So I blame the industry because I love Squirrel Girl, I love Miss Marvel, I love Captain Marvel, I love Moon Girl and her Devil Dinosaur, I love Gwenpool. Like, don't at me. I just don't want to read about macho dudes who can't talk about their feelings and who are like upset at the world all the time. It's like, everyone was bullied, man. Get over it. Like, that's not a reason.
I want to say
Me that I see myself in, okay? I'm no superhero.
That's okay, but like, we just need more. I'm a white girl. I just want white girls. Well, not just white girls, because I just named not white girls. Anyway. Girls.
I want to say if I'm lucky enough to be re-invited back onto the show, I want to next time talk about the G. Willow Wilson, Kamala Khan, Miss Marvel, at least the first two trades or however many trades. That is one of the greatest modern runs of comics in the last 30 to 35 years. Absolutely amazing. One of the best characters that Marvel has created in a long time. So if I'm lucky to come back, I would love to talk about that.
You will be. So we've got like 7 minutes left because I talk a lot, and of course I have so much to talk about. This is something that I read issue 1 of Batman Damned. A, because I'm in love with Lee Bermejo. B, because Brian Azzarello is my friend. And C, because Batman's penis was in it and the world was freaking out. So I read issue 1. Mandy, I was even there when she pulled it off the shelf. We went to the comic book shop like we always did around that time. Went back, she read it, and then the world imploded. And I was like, maybe I'll read your copy. And I liked it, but I only ever read the one copy because it's not my jam. I don't know if you guys have read that or the entire run. I know Mandy has, but I don't know about Tommy and Chris. But I found a lot of those similarities in Batman Ego. I'm wondering your guys' perspective on that. Like, did you...
When you told me that, I was like, okay. I was like, I see where she's coming from, and I think it's largely based because you only read the first one.
Right.
Because it does, and that's...
And in particular, the scene in which we see his penis, because it's him as Bruce Wayne naked, both psychologically and physically, being attacked by his costume, which is his
I do think that there are aspects, maybe not physically or with the monster itself, but I think this conversation about what Batman's going through is a constant throughout Batman's stories. And so I think you could probably pick out a handful that'd be like, well, this, was similar because of this, or, talks about Batman's struggles with this or here or that. I think that's Batman. And so, I did see where you were coming from with the kind of like raw aspect of, I think that's kind of what you were pointing at. Yeah. It was like a lot deeper than you might find in like a regular Batman run or something. And it was kind of straight to the point. And yeah, I did like Damned does have that, but was more based in like I think it was still a little bit more Joker battle based, and I mean Constantine is a main character in it, and
Kind of the narrator.
yeah, I was like it definitely goes on a different tangent overall, but I do understand what you're saying with the like kind of Batman on his knees aspect, kind of like,
yeah,
what am I doing?
And absolutely, I only read that first issue.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Well, I want to say I read the first issue and eventually went back and reread it, and all of it being said, I love Azzarello. Lee's artwork is incredible. It has all the things that I want. It's got Swamp Thing. It's got Zatanna. It's got John Constantine. It's got the Batwang. It's got all the things that I want in a Batman comic. But for some reason, it just did not connect with me. I don't know if maybe from the backlash that first issue had. I don't know if Brian really wanted to continue it. I don't know if it was always supposed to be 3 issues, but I don't know. It just didn't connect with me for some reason.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't know. I remember we were at a con, or I was at a con. I don't know if you were there, Mandy, but I ended up going to dinner with Azzarello one of the nights, just him and I, like the weekend after, or like 2 weeks after. That was Baltimore Comic Con.
Baltimore, maybe?
That was Baltimore.
Yeah.
And I remember just being like, dude, like, you know, what's up? And he basically was like, you know, he's like, I get it, because like if you were to show like Wonder Woman's breasts, you know, people would lose their minds. He's like, I get it, but like people are missing the story. That's something that between me and Lee and our editors and DC, we all agreed was acceptable. And it just, yeah, I think it just completely destroyed the project, what the project was meant to be. Whether or not that went on to affect his work, I have no idea. But I know that he was pissed because DC made him go to New York Comic Con and then canceled all his events. And he was like, what? Like, so he's really upset about that because DC was just trying to do damage control. But it's like, man, back up your creators. Like, it's a Black series. Like, if you support it enough to put it onto a printing press, keep supporting it. Like,
that was my question for it, because I was working at the comic shop at that point, and I remember the craze behind that first issue. And I wonder if that first issue is what changed Black Label as a whole, because what we know it as today is it's all creator owned. It's a lot of like an artist and a writer going to DC saying, hey, I have this story for a character, can I write it in your sandbox? But from my understanding, what Black Label was going to be in the beginning, and I could be wrong here, was more like adult theme, almost like a Marvel Knights type of subtitle within the DC universe. Am I incorrect in thinking that?
Mandy might know more than me, but I do
Come on,
think
Mandy, give us the tea.
Yeah, I was like, I
had said they were going to cancel the Black Label, or they were rumored to maybe be canceling it after that. So the fact that it continued on, obviously there was restructuring. I don't know what their plan was. Do you have insight, Mandy, that you can share without getting in trouble?
Let me grab my tea really quick.
Yeah, I think there was probably conversations. I don't know how much I could say. I mean, it's positive that it is still going on, and I think isn't Strange Adventures is on the Black Label, I think, right? Yeah. So it's like, I mean, that's big because that's one of their biggest kind of series right now that they're trying to promote and push at DC. So I mean, maybe that'll bring life back to what that was supposed to be. Yeah, I don't know. I'm trying to like,
and you just fall out of frame. It's fine.
yeah,
Just like roll. Yeah, like I think
there's definitely things that probably got changed, but
yeah, anyone could know that it had to change, whether or not we know exactly why or when or who. But DC as a whole obviously has been restructuring. We know that they've just had a massive change in their highest ups. So who knows what's related? I
actually just recently bought the Nancy Collins Swamp Thing omnibus, and it was Black Label for some reason. I'm not really sure why. That's the whole issue, I think, with the Black Label that we've been talking about for the last 10 minutes. What is it? I don't really care, to be honest. I'll buy it regardless. But yeah, I have no idea what Black Label is at this point.
I think it's likely more like a safe space for the creatives to have something that could be more adult thing. Like, I mean, I think you've read Mr. Miracle, correct?
Absolutely.
I would have assumed that would probably have fit okay on that, just based off of the first page alone.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Because you have to think about it. Like, a kid can walk into a comic book shop and there's not like ratings on the comics, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's kind of where the Black Label was to lean, and it might still somehow, without, Batwang, but is more along the lines of just like, maybe not intended for younger audiences, kind of along those lines. And so I think, like I said, I think as we see maybe more books releasing on that, it would probably make more sense. But I think they're trying to not let go of it completely.
Independent comic books too.
Yeah.
Right. So it's both, like, there is a comic book called Sex Criminals.
Mhm.
You could never have a comic book at DC called Sex Criminals 10 years ago. So what their solution is we will create something that there is a safe space for these more potentially controversial. And because of that, if they're following the model of indie comics, especially Image, creators own their work. So yeah, like you're saying, it's them getting permission. Can I use your character? But who knows? I don't know the contracts or anything, but it's possible you would own anybody you made within that realm. Sometimes that happens anyways. So depending on what it is.
I think we all just came up with a really great brand new Black Label storyline where Bruce Wayne and Batwing actually meet up and talk to each other. And no, I'm kidding.
It's like a big shadow of it. You're like, oh god.
I mean, to be fair, all you have to do is just change the color of Batman and Ego, and you basically got it. It's very close.
We'll just do our own edit, and it'll be on Near Mint's OnlyFans launching. No, I'm just kidding.
Chris, is there more that you would want to recommend if someone liked this book, or just books you love in general?
Absolutely. So we were talking about it previously. If you were someone who's not super duper a fan of superheroes similar to Alana, I would say some other great superhero stories that are not solely based in that would be, again, Spider-Man Blue. I would say Superman All 4 Seasons would be a really good one. That's a really great kind of reflective on Superman and why he is so great. I meant to bring that up earlier, but it's not. It has less to do with like him being, saving the world, and more about who Clark Kent is, and I think that's really important. I'm trying to think of so this is so like not original, but I've reread Saga probably every 4 months. And I absolutely love it. Again, always. Brian K. Vaughan is my favorite writer of all time.
We considered calling Near Mint the Brian K. Vaughan fan club.
Yeah.
So
I love
you're
it.
in
I love it.
company here.
Yeah, I recently reread Saga again. When I worked at the comic shop, if someone came in and said, "Hey, look, I really want to read a great story. I don't care if it's superhero. I don't care if it's not superhero related," I would immediately put Saga trade paperback #1 in their hands for $9.99. And they would come back and buy all the other 7. So I would say if there's one book that I recommend above all, it would be Saga.
Yeah. That, Why the Last Man is our other fave here. And then I would say Mr. Miracle is our other top recommend all the time.
Yep.
But yeah, those are great recommendations because that is always what I wish I had when I started reading comics, was a comic that you will like if you don't like normal comics. I remember reading the Blackest Night, Darkest Day Green Lantern run, and I read like 4 of the volumes, and it was fine, but I couldn't tell you a single thing about it. Whereas Batman Ego is something I could probably talk about years from now. It definitely is more accessible to most readers, which we love to have here at Near Mint. Going off that, does anyone else on the team have recommendations that if someone reads this, they might like? Batman of the Animated Series?
I have one more recommendation while you guys think.
Yes.
It's another Tom King classic. It would be his Vision run at Marvel. Actually, hang on one sec.
Love it. Mandy, go get ours. We have 2 copies now.
I'm sure he has something fancy. Is
What
there
are you saying there?
is there a
I
Tom
don't-
Doodle in that?
What's that?
Is there a Tom Doodle in that one?
Is there a doodle?
I do have a doodle by Mitch and Tom from New York Comic Con last year on a Heroes in Crisis. It's basically Mitch did his little Mr. Miracle that he likes to do at conventions.
Yeah.
But Tom drew a picture of Mr. Miracle and Batman high-fiving each other. It was really cool. But Vision, this is what I kind of think catapulted Tom King into the comic book status he's at today. Absolutely incredible story. This is probably one of the best deluxe books that you can buy right now is the Vision book. So I highly recommend this one as well.
Is that because the version that we have, I would argue, is one of the worst printed comics I own. Like the story, that is probably my favorite superhero story. I don't know if mine's deluxe, but the paper, it feels like newspaper thin, and it drives me crazy. And it's something that Marvel does quite often. But
This
they
has like
don't.
full strips and stuff.
Yeah, we have that one, Alana.
Oh, I don't know, because the paper on it, I don't even physically have it with me.
Books. The paper's not.
I find Marvel, the trades and the deluxe, they spend more money. It's the single issues are kind of shitty, but they're also easier to sign. So for my creators, I would rather that. Anyways, we are way over time. Did you guys have any recommendations?
No, I would have probably picked something like Vision because I think it does get on that like kind of deeper level of what similar to this one.
Totally. And if you have seen the little trailers for the What If stories, or not the What If, the other one,
WandaVision.
WandaVision, the first couple episodes or whatever, they're thinking there's little bits of this like 60s sitcom. It's not at all related to Tom King's Vision, but it gives us similar feels.
But it looks like it could.
It looks like it could.
Sure, it's very close.
Yeah, it's pretty close. My recommendations, I probably would have said, Mr. Miracle, Vision, something that is both a comic book superhero and mental health heroes in crisis, like we mentioned. I don't think I have anything else. Tommy, you've got interesting things.
I'm gonna be a synergy here. I this week I wrote a top some number of Batman graphic novels. So since we covered the general, these are superheroes, but more category. If you just like Batman, and if you want more Batman stories that you can just kind of jump into with a small amount of knowledge about Batman, I wrote an article about it. It's funny, at least. It might be a little informative. If you Google top Batman graphic novels, you'll get about 1,000 articles. But now one of them says near mint, so I recommend checking that out. There's some stuff to learn there. That's my recommendation. Is read me.
Do you have a number one on that list?
It was definitely not in order because I don't want to be murdered, and also
that's why I asked.
Yeah, it's definitely
So you could murder him?
No.
I think I put oddly enough, because we were just talking about him, Joker by Brian, how do you say his last name? Azzarello.
Azzarello.
But that was just personal to me because when I was in 8th grade, I got it on Amazon and read through it, and it was like one of the first comics that I read that wasn't just like random issues that were thrown at me.
That I think is also Liebermejo, or at least the covers I've seen. Yeah.
No, it was him, and he did like every like eight pages was like a full painting, and it was just it's very good. It's a bit of an edgy, kind of thing. So it might not treat to everyone, but it kind of opened my mind to a different kind of storytelling for comics. Like it's something that could be just done in one sitting, as opposed to like collecting hundreds of issues and keeping up with all that. So I recommend that, I guess, and also read the rest of the article because I made jokes in it.
Yeah, taking a look. You got something by Bruce Timm and Paul Dini, so big fan. You have Batman Hush, which is what I am always told is the best.
It's
kind
the
of
most.
standalone.
I think I say it in there. It's like the most Batman story you could possibly read.
I definitely own it. It's just not at the apartment. So
I would say the two Batman stories I really want to highlight outside of Ego. Number one would be A Long Halloween. That's my second favorite.
Say that one too. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, man. I didn't mean to steal your
No.
recommendation.
You're fine.
A Long Halloween is a really great Batman story. It's also what a lot of people are considering or rumoring that Matt Reeves is going to be basing his new Batman, his new Battinson Batman story off of. And then also, I owe a lot. I owe so much to the Greg Capullo, Scott Snyder, Court of Owls storyline, because that's what kind of made me into a Wednesday Warrior. It's what brought me into the comic book store every single Wednesday to pick up those issues back when the New 52 first came out. So I have to really seriously shout them out a lot as far as like being one of the greatest Batman stories of all time.
Love that. And that is a pretty long ongoing series, but they've split it up quite well into arcs. So it's good for beginners in that you can commit to one or you can do the whole span, because they did a ton. And then they were also the ones that did the Batman Who Laughs that we talked about at the very beginning of this. So definitely Scott Snyder is one of the top modern Batman writers for sure. So sweet. And he does some really cool indie work. Also, he did Witches, which I really like. So
And I'm Hey, Tommy, I'm gonna plug it for you, okay? Jeez.
Yeah, Undiscovered Country with Charles Soule. And also American Vampire. I really like that. Anyways, cool. I think that we have everything. Does anyone want to give a final thought on the book or on anything? Cool. Awesome.
Mandy.
We, like Tommy said, we do have our that article that he wrote that came out today on our newsletter, but our newsletter also is available, parts of it, on our website, nearmint.com. Links are down below to the website, as well as our social medias. We send out a free email newsletter every Wednesday, 9 a.m. for me, 11 a.m. for Tommy, depends on your time zone. It's pretty brief, but it has some interesting stuff, both original content, and we share other information. It's a good source for new readers, as well as for people that just want more information on comic books. Like I mentioned earlier, we do this Near Mint Book Club every week. We do it live on YouTube right now with typically a guest, but not always. Next week, we are not going to have a guest, and it's just going to be the Near Mint team, which is myself, Alana, Tommy, and then Mandy. Yes. And we're going to be reading Hellboy. So that's going to be super fun. We typically read them on Comixology, so if you want to join in on the fun, you can pick up a copy on Comixology either by doing their unlimited if you're in the States, or buying single issues. They're typically cheaper than physical copies, but they're digital. So if it's something you want to hang out and talk about, cool. It also might be related to the movie. So if you just watch the movie, I don't know. I actually haven't read the book, so I can't tell you. He says no. But I'm a fan of Mike Mignola, who is the artist.
About Hellboy too.
Perfect. So we will be talking about that next week. So if you want to join us then. Otherwise, if you miss us, we do keep these videos on our YouTube, and so you can watch this at any time. We will do our best to respond to any comments that happen later on, and we respond to live comments as they come up. So if you want to be a part of the conversation, if you want to be part of the book club, we'd love to have you. Thank you so much for coming, Chris. It was great to have you. We would love to have you. Yeah, plug yourself. Links are down below. But what do you do?
So I actually am a co-host to a podcast called The Oblivion Bar. It's basically very similar to what you guys do. We just kind of go over the world of nerd. We generally have a central topic each week. Last week we pretty much went over the history and our favorite Saturday morning cartoons, which was really fun. And then this next week, we're talking about the worst reboot/remakes in the history of movies. So, yeah, and then episode 10, we're talking.
The Last Airbender.
That will definitely be mentioned for sure. And episode 10 is actually pretty cool because we're having Matt Draper, who is a really great comic book video essay YouTuber. He's going to be a special guest as we talk about the most underlooked comic book characters of all time. Well, superheroes, I guess, is probably the central theme, but yeah, he'll be on there, which is a big deal. He's a great content creator on YouTube. So looking forward to have him on that. Our Twitter is @OblivionBarPod, Instagram @OblivionBarPod, Facebook @OblivionBarPod. Everything is the same.
I'm pretty sure I have your Twitter and your Instagram linked below. If someone wants to listen to your podcast, where is it available for them to listen?
It's on all the major podcasting streaming sites: Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, and Google Play.
Sweet. All right. So listen to Oblivion Bar podcast, which has Chris Hacker. We will likely have him back because we like having people to talk with. Even though I talk for so much of it, I swear I'm working on it, guys. Thank you so much for joining us. We're gonna head off here. So Mandy, send us off with your classic send off. That's a great one. Bye.